1347, October. The port of Messina, Sicily. 12 ships dock after a long voyage across the Black Sea. The crew is exhausted. Most of them are already dead. The few still standing are covered in strange black boils, oozing blood and pus. They have fevers so high they can barely speak. The harbor master orders them to leave immediately, but it's too late. The rats have already left the ships. Within days, the city of Messina begins to die. First dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. Bodies pile in the streets. The smell of death fills every corner. No one knows what is happening. No one knows how to stop it. And no one knows that this is just the beginning. Over the next 5 years, this invisible killer will spread across Europe, Asia, and North Africa. It will kill more than 50 million people. It will wipe out entire cities. It will destroy families, economies, and empires. And when it finally recedes, the world will never be the same. This is the story of the Black Death, the plague that changed everything. These were the last 30 seconds of the old world, and the first 30 seconds of a new, darker one. To understand the Black Death, you first need to understand where it came from. The year is 1346. The Mongol Empire stretches from China to Eastern Europe. Trade routes connect continents. Silk, spices, and gold travel thousands of miles. But something else is traveling too, something invisible. The bacterium is called Yersinia pestis. It lives in the fleas that live on rats, and rats live everywhere humans live, on ships, in grain stores, in palaces, in peasant huts. The first outbreak likely began in the steppes of Central Asia, near Lake Issyk-Kul in present-day Kyrgyzstan. Archaeological evidence shows a spike in graves there in 1338 and 1339, with inscriptions blaming pestilence. From there, it followed the trade routes west. In 1346, the plague reached the Mongol army besieging the Genoese trading port of Kaffa, on the Crimean Peninsula. The Mongols were dying in droves. Desperate, their commander ordered the corpses of his own soldiers to be catapulted over the city walls. It was one of the first recorded uses of biological warfare. The Genoese threw the bodies back, but the rats had already crossed. When the Genoese fled Kaffa by ship, they unknowingly carried the plague with them, to Messina, to Venice, to Marseille, to the rest of Europe. The question that haunted every doctor, priest, and king was simple and terrifying. What is this thing, and how do we stop it? They would spend years searching for answers, but by the time they found them, millions were already dead. The plague is not one disease, it is 3, and each one kills differently. The most common form is bubonic plague. A flea bites a rat infected with Yersinia pestis. The flea's gut becomes blocked. It becomes ravenous. It bites a human. The bacteria enters the lymphatic system. Within days, the lymph nodes in the groin, armpits, or neck swell into painful black lumps called buboes, hence the name. The victim develops a high fever. They vomit. They hallucinate. Most die within a week. But there is a worse form, pneumonic plague. When the bacteria reaches the lungs, it causes severe pneumonia. The victim coughs blood. And here is the nightmare. Pneumonic plague spreads through the air. Just breathing near an infected person can kill you. Death comes in 2 or 3 days. And then there is septicemic plague. When the bacteria enters the bloodstream directly, the skin turns black and dies, while the person is still alive. Hence the name, the Black Death. Death comes in less than 24 hours. In 1347, no one understood any of this. There were no microscopes, no germ theory, no antibiotics. The best medical knowledge came from ancient Greek texts and prayers. Doctors wore strange beak-like masks filled with herbs, believing that bad air, miasma, caused the disease. They bled patients. They burned aromatic woods. They prayed. Nothing worked. The church said the plague was God's punishment for sin. Processions of flagellants wandered from town to town, whipping themselves bloody to beg for mercy. Jews were accused of poisoning wells. Thousands were burned alive. The plague continued. And while everyone looked for answers in the wrong places, The rats kept breeding, the fleas kept biting, and the death toll kept rising. October 1347, Messina, Sicily, the first European city to fall. Within weeks, the plague spreads to Genoa and Venice. Venice is a city built on water. They think the canals will protect them. They are wrong. The rats swim, the fleas jump. Within months, 2/3 of Venice's population is dead. January 1348, the plague reaches Marseille, France, a major trading port. From there it spreads like wildfire, west to Spain, north to Paris, east to the Rhine Valley. In Paris, the Sorbonne Medical School issues a report. They blame a conjunction of Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. The king, Philip VI, orders the city gates closed, but the plague is already inside. 50,000 Parisians die. That's half the population. March 1348. The plague crosses the English Channel. It arrives in the port of Weymouth. By June, it has reached London. The Thames River turns black with corpses. The king's own daughter, Princess Joan, dies at the age of 14. The royal court flees to the countryside. The plague follows. In London, the dead are buried in mass graves called plague pits. There are so many bodies that the churchyards cannot hold them. The smell is unbearable. Some pits hold 50,000 bodies. But the worst is yet to come. 1349. The plague reaches Scandinavia. A ghost ship drifts off the coast of Norway. Inside, the crew is dead. The rats are alive. When the ship finally beaches, the plague spreads across the entire region. In Bergen, 2/3 of the population dies. 1350. The plague reaches Eastern Europe. Poland, isolated and with fewer trade routes, is spared the worst, but Russia is not. The plague kills an estimated 500,000 Russians. By 1351, the Black Death has swept across the entire continent. It has killed an estimated 30% to 60% of Europe's population. Some villages simply vanish. No one left to bury the dead. No one left to remember their names. The numbers are almost impossible to comprehend. In Florence, 60% of the population dies. In Hamburg, 70%. In London, 40%. In some small towns, 90%. The total death toll in Europe alone is estimated at 25 million. Worldwide, more than 50 million. To put that in perspective, the First World War killed 20 million people over 4 years. The Black Death killed more than double that in just 5. And here is the most terrifying part. No one knew when it would end. There was no cure, no vaccine, no government plan, only death. Day after day, week after week, year after year. These were supposed to be the last 30 seconds of millions of lives. But for many, those seconds lasted years. What would you do if death was everywhere? If your neighbor died overnight? If your own children started coughing blood? If the church told you God had abandoned you? This is what happened in the 14th century. Some people turned to religion. They prayed. They gave money to the church. They bought indulgences, believing that paying for forgiveness could save them from the plague. It didn't. Some turned to hedonism. The Italian writer Giovanni Boccaccio, who survived the plague in Florence, wrote about people who drank, sang, and made merry, satisfying their appetites with whatever they could. They believed that if death was coming anyway, they might as well enjoy their last days. Some turned to violence. In Strasbourg, the Jewish community was accused of poisoning wells. On Valentine's Day, 1349, hundreds of Jews were burned alive. The plague continued. Some turned to scapegoats, wanderers, lepers, beggars, anyone different. In some cities, entire groups were rounded up and executed. The plague didn't care. It killed rich and poor, young and old, saint and sinner, and some turned to isolation. Doctors wore their beak masks, not knowing they were useless against airborne bacteria. Families abandoned their loved ones. In some cities, dying people were simply thrown into the streets. The English poet William Langland wrote, "Death came like a thief in the night. No one was prepared. No one was safe." But perhaps the most haunting account comes from the Italian chronicler Agnolo di Tura. He wrote, I, Agnello di Tura, buried my 5 children with my own hands, and there were so many dead that no one had time to mourn. The dead were buried in pits, sometimes 10 or 20 at a time, and I, who am writing this, survived, but I do not know why. The plague didn't just kill bodies. It killed faith, it killed trust, it killed the idea that the world made sense. These were the last 30 seconds of medieval innocence, and they never came back. But here is where the story takes a strange turn. Not everyone died. Some people never got sick at all. Others got sick and recovered, and no one knew why. Today we know that some people have a genetic mutation that makes them resistant to Yersinia pestis. The mutation affects a protein called CCR5. Without it, the bacteria cannot enter white blood cells. People with this mutation are naturally immune. Scientists have found that this mutation is more common in populations that survived the Black Death. It was evolution in action. The plague killed the vulnerable. The resistant lived and passed their genes to the next generation. But in 1348, no one understood any of this. Survivors were seen as blessed by God, or cursed, or simply lucky. One survivor was the English king, Edward III. He watched his daughter die, but he lived. He used the crisis to consolidate power. Another survivor was the Italian poet Petrarch. He lost his muse, Laura, to the plague. He wrote, the happy world is no more." Some survivors became richer. With so many dead, labor was scarce. Peasants who once worked for pennies could now demand higher wages. Landowners were desperate. This shift in economic power would eventually lead to the end of feudalism. But most survivors were just broken. They had lost everyone. Their parents, their children, their friends. They lived in a world of ghosts. These were the last 30 seconds of their old lives. And they spent the rest of their years trying to rebuild. When the plague finally receded in 1351, Europe was a different place. Millions were gone, but those who remained had to figure out how to live. The church lost credibility. If God had abandoned the world, why follow his rules? Faith became more personal, less institutional. Some people turned away from religion entirely. Others embraced new, more mystical forms of worship. The economy transformed. With fewer workers, wages rose. The old feudal system, where peasants were tied to the land, started to crumble. Peasants could move, they could negotiate, they could buy their freedom. This shift laid the groundwork for capitalism. Art and literature changed too. Before the plague, art was religious and idealized. After the plague, it became darker, more realistic, more focused on death. The dance of death became a common theme. Skeletons leading kings and peasants to the grave, everyone equal in death. Universities grew. Medical schools, in particular, began to question the old texts. If Galen and Hippocrates couldn't stop the plague, maybe they were wrong. This spirit of inquiry would eventually lead to the Renaissance and the scientific revolution, and medicine itself began to change. Quarantine was invented. The word comes from the Italian quaranta giorni, meaning 40 days. Ships arriving from plague-affected areas had to wait 40 days before docking. It was crude, but it worked. Isolation saved lives. The Black Death also changed how cities were built. Narrow streets were widened. Sewers were improved. Sanitation became a public concern. Not because people understood germs, but because they noticed that clean places had fewer deaths. In short, the world that emerged from the plague was not the same one that entered it. It was more cynical, more practical, more individualistic. It was also more resilient. But here is the question that historians still debate. Could anyone have stopped it? Or was the Black Death inevitable? These were the last 30 seconds of the medieval world, and the first 30 seconds of the modern one. For centuries, historians blamed rats. The black rat, Ratus ratus, lived on ships and in cities. It was the perfect host for plague-carrying fleas. But recent research has cast doubt on the rat theory. Studies of plague DNA from mass graves in London suggest that the Black Death spread too fast to be carried only by rats. Rats are slow, they don't fly, They don't travel hundreds of miles in days, but humans do. New evidence points to human ectoparasites, body lice, and human fleas. These pests live on people, not rats. They spread from person to person through clothing and bedding, and they move as fast as humans move. If this is true, then the Black Death was not primarily a disease of rats. It was a disease of poverty, of people living in close quarters, of infrequent washing, of sharing beds. This theory explains why the plague spread so quickly through Europe, and why quarantines, which separated people from each other, eventually worked. But it also raises a darker possibility. If the plague was spread by body lice, then the real culprits were not rats or fleas. They were human beings. Our own behavior, our own poverty, our own ignorance made it worse. So who is to blame? No one, and everyone. Today, the Black Death is still with us. Yersinia pestis never went away. It lives in rodents across the world. In the American Southwest, prairie dogs carry it. In Madagascar, it still kills dozens of people every year, but we have antibiotics now. Streptomycin, gentamicin, doxycycline. If caught early, the plague is treatable. The mortality rate drops from 60% to less than 5%. We also have sanitation. We have pest control. We have public health systems. When a case of bubonic plague appears today, it is news, not a catastrophe. But here is the uncomfortable truth. The Black Death could happen again. Not the same disease, perhaps, but a new one. A virus, a bacteria, a fungus, something we have never seen before. The next pandemic could be airborne. It could be silent. It could spread before anyone shows symptoms. And if it is drug-resistant, antibiotics will not save us. The Black Death taught us that. Complacency is death. Ignorance is death. Slow response is death. We have better tools now, but we are still human. We still make mistakes. We still ignore warnings. We still think it won't happen to us. Those were the last 30 seconds of millions of people who thought the same thing. In 1347, 12 ships docked in Messina. The crew was dying, the rats were dying, and no one understood what was about to happen. Over the next 5 years, the Black Death killed more than 50 million people. It destroyed families, cities, and empires. It changed the course of history, and when it was over, the world was never the same. But here is the question we still cannot answer. Could it have been prevented? If the doctors had known about germs, if the priests had not blamed sin, if the kings had closed the ports earlier, would it have made a difference? Maybe, or maybe not. Some things are beyond our control. Some things come like the plague, without warning, without mercy, without reason. The Black Death is not just a story about the past. It is a warning about the future, because the next plague is not a matter of if, it is a matter of when. And when it comes, will we be ready, or will we make the same mistakes? These were the last 30 seconds of the medieval world, but the same story is waiting to be written again. Last 30 seconds.